In 1775, Thomas Paine wrote a pamphlet stating that the freedoms of men can only be maintained by limiting the power of government. The pamphlet was called Common Sense, and today it still is common sense.
I'm April Giarrusso.
I'm Mark Zaccaria. This is Common Sense. Welcome back. If you've tuned in to get the down low on the latest 38 Studios gossip, you really don't have much of a life, do you? We know. We don't either. So we'll have that story for you. If you've tuned in to be briefed on a state administration as less glamorous and more bumbling version of the Keystone Cops, we'll have that for you too. If you came to Common Sense this week to find out what the real disrespect is that's being shown by government to minority communities all across our nation, we will also report to you on that, sad though it is. On a brighter, or should I say higher note, I will conduct this week's in-depth interview. Right after news analysis, I'll be talking to Pat Rimoshitis. He's the founder and impresario of an outfit known as Green Cross of Rhode Island. Pat and his member caregivers specialize in the medical use of cannabis. In our detailed discussion of the present and future for medicinal marijuana, you may be surprised to hear an upstanding, socially acceptable story about the use of the weed in clinical settings. Okay, we won't get to that interview immediately after the news. As always, we will take a break or two so that April and I can ask and then answer our favorite rhetorical question, are you kidding me? Then, true to form, we will hand the broadcast over to commentator Jeff Richard, who will give us his ruminations on the unusual campaign technique of 1st District incumbent Congressman David Cicilline. We have a power-packed broadcast for you this week, so let's get it started with our take on the top news stories impacting Rhode Islanders this week. April?
Thanks, Mark. Last week, Kate Bramson reported in the Providence Journal that Curt Schilling and 3 other former executives of the failed 38 Studios software company reached a $2.5 million settlement agreement in the lawsuit brought against them by the state. That suit, of course, was to recover as much as possible of the $75 million in loans made to the startup to get it to relocate to the Ocean State. Now that the judge hearing the case has agreed, Schilling and Company will be clear of all legal entanglements, and after legal fees, you and I will have just a bit over $2 million to add to the cash recovered to pay back principal and interest in the failed financing deal. Schilling's contribution, by the way, was the next to last stone unturned by the Commerce Corporation in its quest to get back the money they spent in our name. So here are the box scores so far. The total amount recouped will be just a shade over $45 million. But the attorneys have to get their due. Legal fees and other expenses consumed around $8.5 million. All of which leaves about $36.5 million to go towards the $75 million the legislature borrowed in 2010. You could say that so far it cost us nearly half the bonded proceeds just to try to help get a new venture started here in Rhode Island. If you did, you'd be pretty much alone, though. What it really cost the hard-working, tax-paying men and women of the Ocean State was a huge amount of trust in their elected officials. In retrospect, it is obvious that even if 38 Studios got a check for the full $75 million, it would not have been anywhere near enough to have set them up to compete against gaming industry giants, the likes of World of Warcraft. What they did get was only around $47 million. We'll talk later about the shrinkage. We also heard repeatedly that these were moral obligation bonds. No problem, folks. Investors understand. We wouldn't have to pay them back at all, even if 38 Studios failed miserably, which it did, only days later. But we started paying just the same, despite the fact that we'd also paid for an insurance policy to hold us harmless from having to pay. Huh? Yeah, that cost some trust, too. Maybe the worst part of the whole dog and pony show was that no one in government ever took any responsibility for the screw-up. No one tried to explain that they thought they'd done the right thing, but only found out later, and to their horror, that they'd booted it. And if we had to hear about every bit of it almost every day for 4 years while the Attorney General, himself implicated in the initial legislative trickery, and the Superintendent of State Police, now hastily retired, conducted an exhaustive investigation. Those results just came in a month ago. They were, drumroll, there's nothing to see here, ladies and gentlemen. Trust us. Trust us? Don't bet on it. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, my advice is to vote no on the $20 million bond for Proudport this November, unless you want to see all this happen to you all over again. Mark?
Thanks, April. In years past, Rhode Island's parole board was ably headed by Paula Kokan. She was widely credited with doing an excellent job on behalf of the people of the Ocean State whenever a convicted inmate was considered for the early release back to the community. Similarly, in days gone by, the state's sex offender registry was headed by Ken Walker. He, too, was given high marks for centralizing detailed information on the whereabouts and activities of those mandated to register. Today, however, there has been an evolution in the state's bureaucracy, and both those jobs are being performed simultaneously by one executive. The administrator at the intersection of these two critical positions is Laura A. Pizzaturo. Common Sense hopes that these positions were consolidated as a result of some sense of gaining efficiency by lowering costs, rather than because of an internal turf battle. There is evidence, however, that this two-point charge is quite a bit for one person to handle. Recently, Walt Buteau of WPRI 12's Eyewitness News Investigative Unit ran a story that highlights some of the current shortfalls in both the sex offenders registry and the parole process. We are told that an upcoming report in Walt's series will present evidence that 21 of those listed on the state's sex offenders registry today do not have any address listed as their permanent residence. This obviously makes it impossible for the relevant local police departments to have any idea that a new convicted sexual predator is living in their jurisdiction. That is, after all, the reason the General Assembly created the registry in the first place. Since most of these stealth pedophiles are also parolees, a question is raised as to their level of compliance with regular reports to parole officers. Buteau has already reported that of those listed in the registry who do give residency addresses, 4 were living at motels. In these cases, many new questions are raised. Who is paying for those motel rooms? You and me as taxpayers? Also, in a motel, the parole requirement that sex offenders live not closer than 300 feet from underage potential targets could be violated on any given night, depending on who else books a room. One of these motels is the Sand Dollar in Mesquamacut. Does its management inform every other guest who registers that there could be a sexual predator in the next room? Does the management even know? There was also an item on the Channel 12 report that one of the registered sex offenders who now lists the Wickford Motor Inn as his home of record is also working at that establishment as a handyman. Okay, does he have a passkey? Does any of the electrical work he performs on the motel's wiring require certification from a licensed electrician? And if so, does he hold such a cert? It just gets curiouser and curiouser, as Lewis Carroll once said. So, whatever the reason for decreasing the staff who manage oversight of this critical public safety issue, it seems like it's time for the governor to recognize that someone in her administration has some splaining to do. April?
Thanks, Ricky. Folks, the last few weeks have put a serious flaw in current American culture on worldwide display. The racial divide that has plagued our nation since before its inception seems to have actually grown wider again in recent years. Mistrust between communities of color and the police have boiled over to produce new and quickly growing movements, most notably Black Lives Matter. In just the last couple years, violent protests and riots have replaced less aggressive methods of pressing grievances among activists from many minority communities. So today, a number of sectors of American society feel estranged from their own government, and one aspect of that is economic opportunity. That means they also feel disrespected and overlooked. No wonder there's growing rage. But today I'm going to focus not on the abominable actions of select persons against the minority populations, but rather one disadvantage that has been growing for years, the economic disadvantage. Great Society programs were kicked off in the 1960s in an effort to end poverty. No matter how well meant at their outset, they have today resulted in the exact opposite of the goals stated for them originally by the Lyndon Johnson administration. They have done a disservice to America's economic underclass while trying to ineffectively liberate it. The war on poverty has proved, if nothing else, that government giveaway programs cannot give away enough to create self-respect in anyone on either side of the equation. The fix for our economic malaise is well understood. All we have to do is cut the size of government while also cutting its tendency to regulate everything all the time. Smaller government costs less, so it takes less away from the productive economy and tax dollars. Less regulation equals smaller overhead expense within any business, thus leaving more for R&D, infrastructure investment, and increasing its staff. When government stops being interventionist and small business starts being profitable again, we will have unleashed the economic engine that 150 years ago made Central Falls the highest per capita income city in our nation. Something's got to give. Maybe this is one step in helping fix the conflict, and let's hope it does so on November 8th. Mark?
Thanks again, April. That wraps up this week's analysis of the news stories that count for those of us who live here in the Ocean State. Before we move on to the first segment of my interview with Pat Rimoshitis of Green Cross of Rhode Island, let's take time out for some political satire. I believe someone is about to ask our favorite tongue-in-cheek question, are you kidding me?
During the Cold War, the U.S. and the Soviet Union tested one another's resolve in a process known as proxy wars. America's involvement in Vietnam and the USSR's in Afghanistan were both examples of the two superpowers sticking pins into each other while carefully maintaining plausible deniability, one of Richard Nixon's favorite turns of phrase. Well, it seems that time-honored tradition of virtual sniping is alive and well in the Congress of the United States. Are you kidding me? Well, as usual, I'm not. A pitched battle has broken out between Republicans and Democrats on Capitol Hill over the question of who gets naming rights to the Internet. Not bragging rights, Mr. Gore, but the authority to designate domain names and authorize their use. Or not. Since the inception of the information superhighway, that task has belonged to the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. Or ICANN. That's actually a private concern which operates under contractual authority from the U.S. government. Now the Obama administration wants to divest the U.S. of that troublesome detail by formally ceding the rights to a new company with no ties to America or the American government. It is to be called the Internet Assigned Numbers Authority. IANA. Confused yet? Well, in a September 15th article in the Washington Post and Bloomberg News, Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois, the minority whip, made conflicting statements on the issue. He both termed the function, quote, obscure and irrelevant, unquote, and hinted strongly that the Senate minority would filibuster the continuing resolution for government funding that had contained the divestiture language, if it were removed. Objections to giving this worldwide authority away center on losing our ability to combat censorship on the Internet, especially with authoritarian regimes. There is also the question of whether or not packet headers in the proposed new Internet would be traceable to the country of national origin as easily. So why is the congressional minority willing to go to the wall over this obscure and irrelevant registry? And if it's important to divest, why haven't they floated a clean bill to do so, rather than hiding the provision in a huge omnibus spending bill that must pass before the sky starts falling? Why? Because that's how proxy wars are fought in our nation's capital. Are you kidding me?
I'm Mark Zaccaria. This is Common Sense, the program that tries to make sense out of the issues that affect your life and come up with common sense solutions. Welcome back. I'm here today with Pat Rimoshitis. He's a marijuana professional here in Rhode Island, and he is one of a growing number of professionals who are giving medicinal cannabis a good name. So, Pat, welcome to the program. Tell us a little bit about Green Cross, which is your operation.
Sure. Green Cross of Rhode Island is basically a membership organization that allows caregivers and patients, caregivers in this state are considered growers, to come together and to learn, to share information, and also to provide access to safe and reliable medicinal cannabis here in this state.
Great. And so are you then actually a grower, or are you more of a broker?
I'm a grower myself. I'm a patient and a caregiver in this state. Each caregiver is allowed to grow for up to 5 patients. So we try to make sure that any caregivers in our organization have a full load of patients. We ask them to maximize their card to 5 so that any overage they might have would be able to be utilized by other patients within the organization.
So the answer is yes to all of those questions.
All of those questions, yes.
When you actually have a marijuana plant as the source of any of the products that you use. Approximately how many different variations or products come from that plant? How many different things do you get from one plant?
Well, there's many different types of material that can be used from the cannabis plant. Basically, the primary ones are flower, which most people know of as the smoking material. But a lot of our patients, our older patients, prefer edibles, which are usually made with a butter or an alcohol-based tincture, which is easy for them to swallow, put a few drops on their tongue. So there's a lot of different ways out there that they can consume this product, and for us, we specialize in those and one other particular medicinal oil that's it's called Rick Simpson oil, RSO. It's made with an alcohol-based product through cold-filtered roto-vape, so it's very modern and laboratory distilled so that patients can get the most benefit that they can. There are other things on the market that we don't particularly use, wax or oil, sometimes referred to as dabs. There's a space for them in the market. We just don't promote that at our space.
And that's primarily because the patients that you yourself treat don't need them, or it's not the best choice for them, or is it because it's too complex for you to produce it locally in small batches?
It is very complex for us to produce it. The state has mandated certain processes of making it illegal, so we try to stay away from that for one purpose. There is a point for it in the market where, as far as you're trying to come off of opiates or for severe pain relief, but at the same time, we feel that it is, you can get the same relief from RSO that you can from those products, and RSO is not as easily abused. So it can't be used as recreational as these other products can.
So despite the fact that this RS oil comes from the marijuana plant, it's not necessarily directly associated with the euphoria or the high that people associate with it.
Right. So we can actually manipulate the product down to the milligram now through the testing process. So we have the ability to make the milligrams of THC versus CBD, which are the two main compounds in the plant. One, THC is the euphoric part, and the CBD is the more medicinal grade. So we can match those levels higher or lower either way, in either direction.
Okay, so you can adjust it to be mostly medicinal
for the patient.
And it sounds like you can also adjust the dosage per unit.
Sure, absolutely. We have some patients that are as low as 2 or 3 milligrams of THC and 8 or 10 milligrams of CBD. And then we have patients that are on the far end. As far as like cancer patients, for instance, they need 750 to 900 milligrams of THC a day, and that's quite a bit.
And then that's primarily for pain relief.
That's primarily for pain relief, but if someone had told me a few years ago that cannabis had a chance to treat cancer, I probably would have laughed in their face. But I've seen it with my own eyes, and it does have a chance to inhibit cancer growth and sometimes even reverse it.
So where it's been used initially as some sort of an analgesic for pain relief, you're finding that there are additional benefits for it in this particular case with cancer.
Oh, yeah, there are many different uses for it right now. Basically, here on the East Coast, we're about 20 years behind the market on the West Coast. There's many different uses. I've seen people treated with Alzheimer's all the way down to youth patients. Some of the patients that have it that are autistic, I've seen autistic patients treated with it and have the ability to speak afterwards. I've seen it with my own eyes.
Interesting.
That's why I'm such an advocate.
How many other operations are there like yours in the Ocean State, do you know?
There are similar organizations to ours. There are other nonprofits out there that specialize in treating patients, but as far as I know, we're the only one that's gone through the process to be a licensed nonprofit and organization through the state, and we've basically gone through the process of having all of our business licenses and retail licenses in order so that we can treat patients on a decent level.
So obviously being licensed for a business is straightforward. Most people understand that. But being licensed to handle marijuana, you're licensed by the state.
We're licensed by the state. We're not licensed to handle marijuana. We're licensed to treat patients. And we basically put patients and caregivers in connection with each other. Right now, if you become a patient in the state, you get a card which allows you to go to the compassion centers, any compassion center that you like. But at the same time, you're allowed to have a caregiver or a specific grower for you. And that's that's where we come in.
Okay.
So the patients register with us. We have up to 5 patients at a time, and we make it possible for them to have a spot where they can come and get a legitimate caregiver, and then the caregiver and the patient chooses to meet where they'd like to. They have a spot at our office if they can, but it keeps them from having to meet in dark alleys or in parking lots or having people come to your house when you don't know who they are or have to go to their house. It's a dangerous situation. So
I would assume, you see, you've probably opened a lot of eyes already about the true medicinal uses and potential value of these products, but I bet you have to overcome a certain, comic approach to it, or the jokes that are made about, I'm going to get high and
there's still quite a stigma involved in it, and a lot of people don't know where to go. Sometimes they're embarrassed to talk to their primary care physician. So that's where we come in. We offer a lot of information and education. We have growing classes, cooking classes, so we teach people how to use the product themselves to the best of their ability.
Just as a rough ballpark, how many of your patients do you think come in with some prior experience with recreational marijuana, or how many of them just come in because they heard that with their condition they might be able to get some help?
That's a great question. I'd say probably 70 or 75% of our patients have prior use with cannabis, whether it be recreationally or medicinally. We like to say that you don't really recreationally use marijuana. Believe it or not, you're actually treating yourself with medication, whether it's for stress relief, muscle relaxation, whatever you use it for.
That's pretty interesting.
Once we tell people that, they look at it in a different point of view.
Well, again, there is an attitude towards it that's in the process of changing throughout our culture. Pat, right now we're going to leave it at that. This is the end of our first segment, ladies and gentlemen, but stay tuned because Pat Rimashaitis will be back for 3 more segments of this very interesting interview. We do, however, have to take a break right now because I have reason to believe that someone is about to ask the question, are you kidding me? Folks, as we come down to Decision Day in this most unusual of all American presidential races, tensions are running high. Everywhere that we here at Common Sense TV look, we see signs of strain in the fabric of America as passions run incredibly high among partisans. The fight the 2 campaigns are putting up for the 15 to 20 actual undecided voters left anywhere in the 50 states is now reaching a fever pitch, and we still have 4 weeks to go. Are you kidding me? Here's an update from the No Kidding News Desk. Kathleen Kennedy Townsend, former Maryland Lieutenant Governor, and yes, one of those Kennedys, has leaked a private conversation between her and former President George H.W. Bush. She claims the 92-year-old told her he would vote for Hillary Clinton, but that she was not to breathe a word of that to Barbara. Common Sense is still investigating how those two wound up in the same room. Dateline Hollywood. Common Sense can now confirm that the much-heralded breakup of the marriage of Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie was not actually due to his excessive use of booze and weed. That story was only floated by Jolie in order to protect their children at home in the film colony. The real problem seems to be that Brad means to vote for Donald Trump. So the anger issues cited in Angelina's divorce filing were all hers over that decision. But wait, there's more. The No Kidding News Desk can now report there is no truth whatsoever to the rumor that the Statue of Liberty is making plans to return to France over the potential immigration fallout should Trump win the November election. Even so, Lady Liberty's people tell Common Sense that they are still in talks with the Élysée Palace. And these are just the stories we can bring you on TV. Stand by for more high anxiety as America lurches towards Election Day 2016. Are you kidding me? Well, yeah, actually, I think I am this time. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Mark Zaccaria. This is Common Sense. Welcome back. We're talking today with Pat Rimashaitis of the Green Cross organization here in Rhode Island. And Pat is a marijuana professional as a caregiver for the use of medicinal marijuana, and is one, as I said earlier, of a growing number of professionals here in the state giving cannabis a good name as a prescription med.
Hey, thank you.
And I understand you first became acquainted with medical marijuana when you yourself were injured. Can you
That's true.
tell us a little bit about that?
That's true. I was severely injured at work where I had 2 reconstructive surgeries on my spine, which left me with sciatic nerve pain damage. To treat that, I was on a myriad of opiates, all the way from your basic Vicodin up to 120 milligrams of morphine a day. And I'm glad to say that today, with the help of medicinal cannabis, I'm completely opiate free. So when I was first injured, I feel like I lost almost 4 years of my life to painkillers where I just wasn't myself.
And you would say that those opiate painkillers really did have side effects that were noticeable.
Oh, yeah, much more dramatic than cannabis use.
And as you said in the earlier segment, since there are really 2 active ingredients of cannabis, and since you try and use the one that is more medically effective and is less euphoric,
yes,
the actual cannabis products that you administer don't usually make people look at the ceiling and listen to music.
Oh, it all depends. The plant needs a little bit of each of the 2 chemicals to be able to cause that that reaction. It needs both CBD and THC. We have the ability to move the myriad up and down on the ladder, and some people need more THC for pain relief as per se. Other people use pain relief through CBDs, has an anti-inflammatory to it.
So when you say you're a caregiver to a specific patient, you're constantly adjusting things until you find what's right for that patient.
We're trying to specifically, it's very much like wine today with marijuana. There's very many different breeds out there, many different names to them. Some of them are quite exotic, but everyone's genetics are different. Every plant genetic is different. So when you find the 2 that work together for you, it's really quite, it works quite well for most instances.
In our first segment, you mentioned the difference between the Green Cross operation that you manage and a compassion center.
Yeah.
Most people understand a compassion center as a place where people with a medical marijuana card in Rhode Island can go to get the basic marijuana that they need.
Sure, yeah.
How does your operation differ, and is that a better deal for your patients?
Well, actually, since we've been in existence, the compassion centers have actually lowered their prices on the market to be more compatible with the patient market. We take on the consensus that our patients should only have to pay a certain amount for this medicinal product. It only costs a certain amount to grow and make the product, so there's not really a need to make an exuberant amount of money off the backs of legitimately sick people. So their prices are in order, but sometimes they can range pretty high. The average person might not be able to afford it. So we kind of specialize in tracking their medicine so that we can try to get them exactly what they need.
Sounds like the difference between pricing on a business model where you have to have an operation to run and the pricing based on the compassion that you actually have for the patients that you're treating and what they can afford and
I'd like to think so, yeah. We embrace the whole nonprofit.
Your operation is legal, of course.
It's very legal,
Basically,
yes.
You said in our first segment that you have taken pains to get every certification available from the state. The question, I guess, that brings me is, what about the dichotomy between state law, which basically approves of this and is moving towards legalization, and federal law, which still seems to remain stuck in the murder, insanity, and rape age?
Well, I'll tell you something that's a little hard for the average person to believe, that the United States government has allowed one entity to patent medical marijuana and all of its derivatives. Only one entity throughout the entire government. Any guess as to who that is?
No.
It's the U.S. government. So the U.S. government holds the patent for medicinal marijuana while at the same time classifying it as a Schedule I drug. Right. So when you tell people of that hypocrisy, everything else below it falls into space. But basically, for the last 3 or 4 years, I'm not sure exactly, the Department of Justice, part of its funding has had the language written into it that not allowed to use federal funds to enforce medical marijuana laws in states that have already voted it legal. So basically, the DEA, the FBI, they can't spend funds to enforce medical marijuana laws here in a state that's already voted legal. Now, if my operation was to step outside the law, or if I wasn't a licensed caregiver by the card, then of course they could come in and I mean, the difference between 12 plants that we're licensed to have and 13 is jail. So obviously, we try to stay within the rules.
I find it interesting, however, that the federal government has basically the only license that it has granted itself, and so it sounds like when this kind of ironic dichotomy between legality and illegality, when they get done with their game of cops and robbers, they're going to immediately start a game of Monopoly.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of money to be made right now in the criminal enterprises. I know a lot of our jails are for profit.
I understand that, but once they do finally, the federal government does legalize, what does that do for the cost of the product if they are the only supplier?
Oh, if they're the only supplier, then they have a monopoly, and they can mandate the price however they'd like. We'd all like to think that they would mandate the price as to something affordable, but who's to say?
Yeah, and especially with the big deficits they're running, you don't know. But essentially, the model of the free market is what you were explaining to us earlier when you're talking about the compassion centers having higher prices until such time as operations like Green Cross started to become available and pressure the price downward. The same thing obviously is going to happen if basically anybody could grow the stuff in their backyard. You know, I don't necessarily compete with Dave's Marketplace with the tomatoes I grow in my backyard, but it's kind of a seasonal thing for me.
Well,
but it might be a bigger deal with marijuana.
Our whole motto is to get the medicine to as many people that need it as possible at an affordable rate. So if it was to go legalize and legitimize, first of all, a lot of the stigma, social stigma, would be taken away from that. And if people had access to it, then there'd be no role for me to play, except for the part that I track patients' usage and my interactions with them on a regular basis. I mean, if it was available for everyone at a legitimate cost, then obviously the cost would come down.
Right, but with new people coming into the market, there'd still be room for your educational process.
Sure.
We just have about a minute left in this segment. Can you just give me a brief rundown on the actual procedure you use to produce the RS oil you talked about earlier from the plants that you yourself grow?
Right. Well, I don't actually produce it myself because, well, first of all, I'm not an expert on every field that there is in cannabis. My former career was a firefighter and paramedic. So, I mean, if it was to catch on fire, I could probably do something with it. But as far as making the RSO, we rely on experts to do that. The expert that we have, he became involved in RSO because his wife passed away with cancer, and he only found out about RSO in her later stages and has now dedicated himself to make it. He was relatively well off. He has a significant array of laboratory equipment. Rotovape with a low pressure temperature vacuum system. It basically rinses the material in oil, and then, the material is rinsed in alcohol and then evaporated off through this process. So it's very refined, and we can get it down to the milligram, having that material tested afterwards.
So you have a valued supplier.
I think so.
That's great to hear. Ladies and gentlemen, we will take a break at this particular moment. As always, when we do, watch out for someone to step in and ask the question, are you kidding me?
We are always hearing about how our little state is at the bottom of all the good lists and the top of all the bad lists. Now comes WalletHub.com, a personal finance website which has ranked the 150 top U.S. population centers by how much fun they are for day-to-day living. Providence came in at number 23 on that hit parade. Okay, maybe not awesome, but it's still in like the 85th percentile. Are you kidding me? Rankings included weighted scores for entertainment and recreation versus entertainment and parties. Providence came in 86th in the recreation category, but 9th on the one for parties. When it came to factoring in costs, however, we were at 111th. So you see how the net score is a composite of various factors, each of which might mean more to you than to me. As I looked through the rankings, though, I saw that this composite scoring created some strange anomalies. Providence is 23rd, but 22nd is Baltimore. Oh. Have you been to the Inner Harbor recently? So I looked for some of the most notable U.S. nightlife destinations, just to see if Wallet Hub agreed with Gia Russo on what's hot and what's not. Chicago came in at 81, Dallas at 91, Los Angeles was rated 110th most fun town in America. What? New York City ranked 121st. Okay, all right, enough already. Today I got good news for you, but I also have bad news. The good news is that Providence scored high on this survey of fun towns in America. The bad news is it was a bogus survey. Are you kidding me?
I'm Mark Zaccaria. This is Common Sense, and we are now about halfway through our interview with Pat Rimashaitis. Pat runs Green Cross here in Rhode Island, and he is a caregiver and producer of medical marijuana products. Pat, thank you very much for taking time out today to talk to us. One of the things that's bound to impact your business or what's going on, and we talked a little bit about the dichotomy between legality and illegality, Massachusetts this November votes on legalization of recreational marijuana.
Yes.
If it passes, what kind of competition do you think that makes for you?
I wouldn't exactly think that Massachusetts passing it would be more competition for me, specifically because we deal with medicinal personnel. So there's always going to be a call for medicine and people that need specific treatment just beyond recreational use.
And it's probable that if Massachusetts does legalize that, there will be restrictions on moving legal Massachusetts product across state lines.
I assume there would, and of course that's going to create a problem for law enforcement, so I hope they have a handle on that.
Well, they probably hope they do too. So your operation will continue to concentrate on medical marijuana, sure, no matter what happens. With that parallel market might actually take pressure off of you, because has it ever happened that people have come to you claiming a medical need when actually they were really looking for something else?
That's not really happened to us. We don't really, honestly enough, we've had a few people that come in and ask us if we supply other material that can be recreationally abused quite easily, and as soon as we tell them that we don't, we usually don't hear from those people again. But we concentrate on mostly middle-aged patients to older patients. I don't have a lot of youth patients that come to me, especially since they have to sit down and actually have a conversation with me as far as where they could just go somewhere else, buy it retail over the shelf, and go about their way.
Well, speaking of legalization in Massachusetts, I would assume, although there's nothing immediately on the horizon, that legalization of recreational use of marijuana in Rhode Island can't be too far in the distant future. Would you say that's probably on its way?
I'd say it's definitely on its way. Every year since we've had medical marijuana, there's been an attempt to recreationalize it here in the state through law. I thought this past year we had our best chance at it, but the way the law was written had a lot of details in it, and I guess it was too difficult for general passage. So we're going to keep trying, and I'd like to think that definitely within the next 5, hopefully within the next 3, we'll see recreational allowed here in Rhode Island, because just the tax benefits alone is such an opportunity that I feel that we have to take advantage of it. It's how many more mistakes are we going to make in this state to allow our tax dollars to go to other states, whereas we could be holding them on here? I'd like to see us embrace this new green economy. I'd like to see we have some of the best universities in the country right here in this state. I'd like to partner with those universities and really embrace the technology and allow us to strive to go forward on many of the other firsts that we've done here. The Industrial Revolution was started here in this state. So.
Pat, the story you've been telling us throughout our interview is the story of growth in this industry and probably increased demand for marijuana products of all kinds.
Yes,
obviously, as more patients start to hear that it's a viable option, they'll be more interested in medical marijuana.
Obviously, becomes more accepted.
Legalization means its own, what it means on Saturday nights.
Yeah.
But the question I guess I have for you is, does that increased demand, at what point does it start to attract the cartels? Are you aware of any organized illegal attempts to be a supplier?
Well, I can't really say I'm much of a law enforcement expert, but I can say that higher access for people means less demand on the black market. So I could only imagine that those statistics would actually fall away with the legalization instead of the opposite.
Well, the cartels do have an operating railroad, and if their black market demand falls off, and yet they've got a delivery stream for a product that's legalized, wouldn't they be seeking legal approaches? One would hope that if they did that, then they become upstanding citizens, much like the bootleggers in at the end of Prohibition.
Well, I had to pass through hoops and go through regulations just like anyone else, so I assume if they could go under the microscope, then they're allowed to do business just like anyone else.
Interesting. And that will be an additional dynamic that law enforcement will have to keep a real close eye on, I would think. How will any additional legalization at the state level expose you to federal action? Do you think that this rule that you talked about earlier, that was it a congressional mandate that they can't expend any DEA funds in states where it's legal?
It's part of the budget for the Department of Justice. Okay. So I'm not concerned with federal applications into my tiny little spot here in Rhode Island, which we go out of our way to make sure that we're within the law. Matter of fact, below the law at every time, so that we can't be even close to it. So.
Okay, so then you think that the legal liabilities of what are increasingly becoming antiquated laws on marijuana is probably not a big problem for your business going forward?
No, I don't see how it is. It's what we do is legal here in this state. It's only the federal government that classifies it as a Schedule I drug. And again, they're not allowed to enforce medical marijuana laws in states that have voted illegal. So I don't foresee the feds being a problem for me because we stay within the guidelines set forth by the state.
Sounds good. Now, you also, sounds to me like your customer base at any given moment is kind of small. You only have 5 patients in your operation.
No, I have 5 patients under myself. As I said at the beginning, this is a membership organization. So the more caregiver members we have, the more patients we can allow to be treated.
Okay. 2 quick questions come to mind on that. In the event of legalization of recreational marijuana, will, in your opinion, medical marijuana prospects go first to the recreational market because they could probably go down the street and buy something and try it out, and in that way perhaps have a bad experience with it medically?
Well, it's going to be everyone's option to do what they can. I would think that if they were actually ill and seeking medical treatment, that they should speak to a medical professional before they attempt a recreational use.
Or if they're under medical care from traditional medicinal sources, sure. Yeah. Then those sources would direct to you rather than the local head shop.
I would think so, that people that are actually ill would seek out medicinal treatment more than they would recreational.
That brings up another question, and we'll fill out this segment with it and maybe think about it in the break and come back to this too. But have you thought at all about product liability claims that might come your way as a result of people deciding after the fact that the products that they begged you for weren't exactly what they wanted, or something happened bad?
Yeah, we've taken the time to go over that. There hasn't been a single case of a death related to marijuana, luckily. That's not including operating machinery or carelessness. I mean, as a matter of fact, coconuts are more of a danger to you than marijuana. Last year, 150 people were killed by falling coconuts and 0 were killed by medicinal marijuana use. So yeah, there is a liability in it. We have a waiver form that explains how they should use the medicine. They shouldn't operate machinery. They should keep it away from children. They're not allowed to resell it or give it to anyone else. So there's rules and regulations that bind them as an organization that they have to sign up for when they become a member.
Pat, thank you very much. At that, ladies and gentlemen, we will take a break, but please join us for the final segment of this very interesting interview, right after somebody asks the question, "Are you kidding me?" I know. Let's look around America and the world. There are lots of things happening which demand our immediate attention. Bombing Aleppo. Can't make a deal with the Russians. ISIS losing in Raqqa. ISIS winning in New York and New Jersey. Phony Fed rates. Abuse of free money by the feds. Human tidal wave immigration. Hillary's health. Trump's mouth. Disaster relief at home. Military preparedness. Disaster relief everywhere else. Military unpreparedness. Iranian provocation. North Korean provocation, Chinese provocation, UN provocation, HUD provocation, DOJ provocation, Zika, West Nile, AIDS, Triple E, dengue, fever, and the yaws, just to name a few. So, what is the Rhode Island congressional delegation concentrating on right now as they earn the tax dollars in their weekly paychecks? Why, federally mandated baby furniture and bison. Are you kidding me? Well, not this time. Last week, Mark Reynolds reported in the Providence Journal that Congressman David Cicilline had spent most of his time on the floor of the House whipping votes for a bill to require infant changing tables as standard fixtures in all public restrooms. Okay, there are about 6 legislative days now before the election changes everything. And this is what our first district rep selects as his highest priority? Does he have a speaking engagement with IKEA or something? How about Sheldon Whitehouse? Now that's a Henny Youngman line if I ever heard one. Here are 3 of his most recent offerings. Senate Resolution 572, designating November 5th, 2016 as National Bison Day. Senate Resolution 569, recognizing November 26, 2016 as Small Business Saturday. And Senate Resolution 556, designating the week of September 12 through September 16, 2016 as National Family Service Learning Week. That last one hasn't passed yet, but the week to be designated has. Oh well. It seems the voters here in Little Rhodey are starting to come around to the need to clean house, and Senate 2 up on Smith Hill. Could that same treatment be needed down in Washington? Or, to further intone the ghost of Henny Youngman, take my congressional delegation. Please. Are you kidding me?
It's Mark from the bunker. It's my listening post in the cellar of the Rhode Island State House. You know what I heard today? I heard that in Virginia, at a Donald Trump rally, a veteran comes up to the candidate and presents him with his Purple Heart. So all of a sudden, Trump got this Purple Heart. So what does he say? He says, oh, this is much easier than serving in combat. Hey, Donald, what do you think being president of the United States is? It's sustained psychological combat, and don't you forget it. Look, there's no relief from the fatigue. There's no rear area that you can go to for rest. It's 24/7, my friend, and you better be ready for it. You're telling people you are. You better be ready for it. You keep talking. I'll keep listening. We'll see what happens. But you may get to wear that Purple Heart after all. It's Mark. From the bunker, I'm out.
I'm Mark Zaccaria. This is Common Sense. Thank you for staying with us to this last segment of our very interesting interview on medical marijuana. We're talking today to Pat Rimershaitis. He is the manager of Green Cross of Rhode Island. It's a membership organization where caregivers in the medicinal marijuana field can come together and exchange information and be available to treat patients. So, Pat, once again, thank you very, very much for spending a little time with us today. At the end of the last segment, we talked about the waivers that you now use. Mm-hmm. Do you envision any additional legal involvement when marijuana becomes more legal nationwide and things like product liability lawsuits inevitably come to pass? And the suits, as you say, may not necessarily be because somebody died because they took your product.
Sure.
They may be because that they didn't get well because they took your product. And that's something that people have to know and acknowledge beforehand. So you have a waiver today. Talk a little bit about its limits, and are you envisioning tightening that up any?
Sure. Well, as you know, I'm not a physician or an MD, and I would never make any claims for anyone to do anything adverse to what their doctor tells to them. Well, we consider marijuana right now to be more of a health supplement for you. That's the kind of category that we look at it in. As far as the danger from the waiver, That's why on an individual basis, we sit down and speak to everyone. We consult with them to make sure that they understand what could possibly happen to them and that what they should and should not do, what they shouldn't try to do when they leave.
So you have a personal relationship with each of the 5 patients that you yourself deal with?
Well, I manage the organization, so I meet with patients as an expert, and each individual caregiver can bring their 5 patients in for myself and one of the other staff if they have questions.
Okay, but it is that fairly small, I mean, you're not mass marketing this,
Oh, no.
so the fairly small, high contact relationship that you have is probably going to be a benefit to all of that. Now, once legalization becomes general, we talked earlier about the United States as a government granting itself a monopoly on the development of products. Do you envision that these products, especially the medicinal products, will be run through the FDA? Will there be, the rigorous testing we see in other pharmaceuticals?
I would certainly hope that there is. The drawback to rigorous testing with other pharmaceuticals is that it takes years, decades for them to get on the market. This particular medicine is already on the market, so that causes a problem for the FDA on how to regulate it. That might be one of the drawbacks as why the DEA didn't reschedule it recently. So basically, when we have patients come in and they need caregivers, we associate the two. And we think that, foreseeable in the future, that if it does go to the recreational point, that more people will be open to it. There'll be less of an outlook as far as what patients are concerned. And we'd like to think that we could, if they would embrace it as part of the economy, a lot of people are being hired in states that have recreationalized it. There's a lot of new income, certainly a lot of tax revenue that comes in. Once the government allows universities and other organizations to start actually doing constructive tests, much like other countries have done, the Israelis, the Spanish were years behind them, I think that it will be more and more acceptable.
We'll talk a little bit more about the future in just a minute. Before we do, I'd like to ask you about any additional medical marijuana products that you think you're going to bring into your catalog as time goes by.
Sure. We have a myriad of products right now, basically all the way from flower, which is what people are usually accustomed to. That's the marijuana flower itself. And then...
and that's for smoking.
That's for smoking. We try to encourage people to use a vaporizer, which basically leaves most of the carcinogens still in the product, because there are carcinogens in the plant product. It leaves most of that behind by a simple process. So vaporizing, we try to encourage our patients to use, or edible medicines where they don't have to affect their lungs in any way and they can get it into their system. We didn't have a chance to speak about it, but all mammals have a cannabinoid system, and they have receptors in their body. So it's only during these past 80 years of prohibition that our bodies have been without cannabis as a regular influence. So, I mean, from 1837 to 1937, it was prescribed in over 100 different medicines in this country. So.
Sure. Pretty interesting. Okay, so you'll basically be open to anything that will be safe and effective for your patients.
Yeah, it'll be safe and effective. I'm concerned with marketing, of course, and I'm concerned with packaging. Obviously, some of the products can and have been made into products that look like they could be children's products, and I'm very much adamantly for concerns, labeling, things like that, markings that don't commercialize it as far as juveniles would be concerned.
Well, my guess is that the big marketing push that'll come from the large companies that try and supply the recreational market will be about recreational marijuana and not necessarily about medical initially. Let me just ask you to sum things up for us now. In what do you see happening in your industry? The industry has actually been at work in Rhode Island for almost 10 years now.
Yes.
And what do you see 10 years from now and 10 years after that?
Well, I have pretty big visions for the future as far as cannabis is concerned, because I'm in the market. I've seen what it can do for people. I've seen how it eases their stress on a daily basis. and I've experienced it with it on my own. I think within the next 10 years, we have 24 states right now that have legalized it in some form or another, 4 states that have legalized it recreational. The trend is going to be embracing this product and hopefully the economy that comes along with it. I'd like to say 10 years from now, the entire country has come about change. The drug has been rescheduled. It's really an opportunity here for us to put regulations and taxation in place so that it keeps it away from youths and also brings a legitimate medicine to the people that can be tested, that can be careful, that they can be a safe medicine, and that they can keep it away from children at the same time.
Sure, and you brought up a very interesting point that's always kind of troubled me about it, and that, you know, the anecdotal evidence from places like the Caribbean is that smoking marijuana can be even more harmful to your lungs than smoking tobacco. And if that proves true, one of the things that the increased investigation and research into marijuana products will do, obviously, is make safer versions of it.
Sure. I haven't done many studies as far as, I haven't read a lot as far as cannabis versus cigarettes. I know that there are carcinogens in both, and again, there are many different ways to be able to consume this product, not necessarily smoking, which would be equal to cigarettes.
But I think in your vision, what you've just told us is with the spread of products that will come about after legalization and after big corporations start doing some of this research, you'll probably get away from smoking it because there'll be fairer, faster, and funnier ways to ingest not just the product, but the part of the product you need.
Yes, absolutely. I would envision that it's going to go into that future. And again, we can control the milligrams here in Rhode Island in my small little business, so I can imagine that throughout the country it can be embraced as a real medicine, and even the recreational part can be embraced as not overly dangerous. As far as it being regulated and licensed, similar to alcohol, the taxes in Colorado alone were 2/3 what they received in alcohol taxes in their first year.
Pat, I'm going to have to leave it at that. It's been very interesting talking to you. And giving essentially a socially acceptable slant to the marijuana use and operation here in the state. Please stay tuned, ladies and gentlemen. Jeff Richard, the Portsmouth pundit, is about to bring our show home, and thank you very much for watching Common Sense.
And now for the latest marijuana news. Pot is getting a lot of attention in the papers these days. It is relevant to Rhode Islanders as Massachusetts voters go to the polls to decide on legalizing pot. If Massachusetts goes to pot, we will be driving from the gas pump to the pot store, all within a short drive and 1 or 2 bridges. Well, seems the world at our borders is moving to pot. The Canadians are getting ready to fully legalize. Canada's Prime Minister came out for pot. This promptly caused the marijuana stocks available for all the savvy Canadian investors to soar to new heights. And down south, in Mexico, the Mexican Supreme Court ruled that Mexican citizens can legally grow pot on their properties now. And of course, there are 9 states with marijuana ballot initiatives ready for November. As of now, half the states have either decriminalized or legalized cannabis. The train has left the station and it won't be coming back. So get out your checkbook and call your stockbroker, because a growing number of Americans from all walks of life are going to become millionaires from pot investing. Now, here's some data. A single cannabis plant can produce as much as $14,000 worth of pot. The average grow room can hold well over 100 plants, which makes each room worth $1,400,000 plus. And there are now growing rooms springing up all over the country. If you do a little internet research, you are quickly overwhelmed by the variety and scope of pot investing opportunities. Writing in Wealth Daily, Jeff Siegel writes, quote, "There is no doubt that over the next few years, the great American cannabis trade is going to make many of us richer than we could have ever imagined," unquote. He makes the point that as new companies spring up, the savvy investors will buy into the penny stocks and make a bunch of money. Okay, I'm in. Well, not yet. So who is feeding this pot frenzy? The Washington Post wrote that the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention recently found that since 2002, regular marijuana use among Americans 45 to 54 has jumped by nearly 50%. Among the 55 to 64, usage jumped a whopping 455%. No way. Well, how about us really old folks? Well, we in the 65 plus category jumped up 333%. Seems that if the trend continues, marijuana use among 50 and even 60-somethings could soon be higher than use amongst the teenage crowd. So all the ballot initiatives are getting voted on by pot lovers? California, Nevada, Arizona, Massachusetts, and Maine have pot on the ballot. Florida, Arkansas, North Dakota, and Montana have medical marijuana initiatives on their ballots. If those pass, they would join us, Rhode Island, D.C., and 24 other states that permit the use and sale of pot for medical use. Now, why the sudden rise in pot use from the old folks? Older Americans are turning to pot to treat some of the common ailments of old age, like sleeplessness, aches, and arthritis pain. Seems that Medicare prescriptions for a number of common painkillers are falling in the states that allow medical marijuana. I wonder if Medicare will start paying for pot. Some have suggested that the trend to older potheads is an effort to relive some of the recreational indulgences of our youth. Well, whatever the reason, it is clear that although the federal government still says it is illegal, the feds are at rest, letting the states manage marijuana. With Florida set to vote on medical marijuana, the Miami New Times has given the readers the way to proceed to the first $1 million. Here's what they want you to do. 1, know your medical marijuana history. Step 2, go to cannabis training school, maybe. 3, watch out for the feds. 4, pick a business model. 5, partner with someone who is already in the medical marijuana business in another state. Retain a lawyer who knows the industry. Start lining up voters who could become your patients. 8, line up your money, your family's money, your friend's money, and probably some loan shark money too. 9, prepare to lose it all. 10, start a penny stock company servicing the industry. And there's the way to millions, Florida style. But there is truth in the wisdom of thousands of Americans have already signed up to get in on the ground floor of the great American cannabis trade. Thank you for watching, and God bless.